chase them right across the Bering Land Bridge. I mean, the speculation is that there were actually gaps in the ice sheet that permitted, I mean, nobody's saying that these humans actually walked across 1,500 miles of ice sheet, you know, a mile or two thick, right? No one's talking about that. We're talking about a moment in time, granted, could have been a couple thousand years, but it's a moment in time, geologically speaking, during which it's sort of hypothesized there was either some kind of path through the ice such that these humans could have access to things like plants and animals, or that, in fact, it was a migration along the coast rather than through the middle of the continent. And they made their way through and made it to the Great Plains and continued south, all the way to the tip of South America. This was the peopling of the Americas by humans. And there's also a point in time, identifiable, at which point humans spread into Australia. And the key point here is that the pattern of ice ages and sea level rise and fall created windows in time when these migrations could occur. We'll talk about what happened once people arrived in places like the Americas and Australia in a moment. And maybe actually not till next time, but we will talk about that. That's part of this story, the implications of the arrival of people in these places. But first, we're going to talk about the Neolithic Revolution, which is what precedes it. The Paleolithic. What does lithic refer to? Rock. We're talking about a period of time when rocks provided the raw material for tools for humans. We were working with stones. This is the Stone Age. The Neolithic is the newer part of the new and improved Stone Age. When we go from grinding and polishing stone tools to smelting metal, we actually discover, invent, come to control metal, which of course is derived from stones or from rock, but nonetheless is a huge technological advance in terms of what it enables us to do, the kinds of tools it enables us to manufacture, and the things we can do with those tools. And it happens that some of the things we did at about the same time or subsequent to this discovery were inventing agriculture, domesticating plants and animals, coming up with writing, and building cities. So it's kind of a big deal, this Neolithic thing, right? This really sets us on a new course in terms of virtually everything. What we can do, what we do, how we make things, how we interact with each other, the kinds of, I mean, writing is a pretty big deal in terms of how it changes the way you can distribute, disseminate, teach, take care of, pass on knowledge and information, right? It affects how you can control people, how you can organize people, organize stuff. Agriculture gives us this power of producing food on vastly larger scales than was available to us when we were simply hunting and gathering. So this is a key moment. It occurs at different times and with different plants and animals on different continents. So you might say this is another example of divergent evolution, although that would be stretching it, right? Because in fact, we're talking about the same species. We're not talking about different species of humans. We're talking about humans in all cases. So this isn't really evolution in the Darwinian sense. But we are able to identify that this set of transformations occurred in different places at different times. The key point for Crosby is that it occurs first in what we now think of as the Middle East. The Neolithic Revolution, according to Crosby, he says, at its base is a matter of the direct control and exploitation of many species for the sake of one. So he's looking at this ecologically. He's sort of asking, what are the ecological circumstances surrounding or consequences of the Neolithic Revolution? And he's going to zero in on agriculture, the domestication of plants and animals. And he's suggesting this is when humans, as one species, come to control and exploit other species of plants and animals for their own benefit. The most important contrast, and here we're talking about between the continents, between the Neolithic revolutions on different continents, involves the matter of livestock. And I will come back to that in a subsequent lecture, but I wanted to underscore that point right now. To the extent that he gives us any single variable to look at, it's livestock. Might sound a little peculiar, but that's what he says. All right, 5-minute break. Okay. So we may not make it through all the slides today, but that's all right. We can pick it up again on Thursday. Here, we might pick this as a nice, concise statement of Crosby's thesis. So remember, we started with the question, why the Neo-Europes exist today. This combination of descendants of Europeans far from Europe and food production, surplus food production. Why is it distributed the way it is today? And to the extent that there's one sentence that captures his explanation, his answer is this. The triumph of the European invaders in the Americas and Australasia owed as much or more to the Old World Neolithic Revolution as to the developments in Europe between the age when Abraham tended his sheep in the Fertile Crescent and when Columbus, Magellan, and Cook crossed the seams of Pangaea. That's all, flowery, articulate, perhaps, eloquent language, a fancy way of saying, in his opinion, or his thesis is, the reason the Neo-Europes exist today, where they do, has more to do with what happened in Eurasia during the Old World Neolithic Revolution, has more to do with what happened up to that point when agriculture developed and writing developed and cities developed in what's now southwestern Asia, than it has to do with everything that happened since then, between then and Columbus, 1492. So he's saying the explanation lies basically about 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, when a variety of things happened having to do with domesticating plants and animals, than it does with anything that's happened since then. Does that sound plausible to you on the face of it? So this is not about, the rise of Roman civilization. This is not about the Italian city-states. This is not about the kings who paid for Columbus's expedition. This is about stuff that happened before the Roman Empire even existed. Does that sound plausible to you? Yes, no, maybe? It's supposed to sound at least implausible enough to be interesting. Okay? All right. Plants, germs, and animals. Yes, I intend this as something of a pun on Guns, Germs, and Steel. Okay? I think I mentioned to you that the first couple years I taught this course, we read Guns, Germs, and Steel. And eventually, I stopped teaching it and replaced it with Ecological Imperialism for a number of reasons. But the main reason is Alfred Crosby deserves the credit. This book came way before Guns, Germs, and Steel. And something on the order, I would put it at like 85% of what Jared Diamond has to say in Guns, Germs, and Steel, Alfred Crosby said first. And he not only said it first, he said it better. He may not be quite as good a writer as Jared Diamond, but he is a better thinker. At least he deserves the credit for most of what we might call original in Jared Diamond's book. And I do not mean any disrespect to Jared Diamond. I simply mean Alfred Crosby deserves the credit. So here it is. These are the things that he is going to highlight and unpack for us, the components of his explanation to support his thesis. Food crops, such as wheat, were part of this Old World Neolithic Revolution. Domesticated livestock, such as cattle, horses, sheep, goats, and pigs, are part of this Old World Neolithic Revolution. Diseases, such as smallpox and measles. Weeds that were adapted to high degrees of disturbance, such as plowing and cropping. What's a weed? Anything that a farmer doesn't want. That's pretty close, actually. I was going to say a weed is a plant out of place. A weed is any plant that we don't like what it's doing, where it's doing it. There is no other definition of a weed. Well, or rather, any other definition of a weed is as arbitrary as that one, right? But it's also the case, generally speaking, that most of what we call weeds are plants that grow quickly in disturbed soil. Hence, farmers' antipathy towards them, right? You plow the soil to plant a crop, and lo and behold, these other things grow as well. And they're annoying, therefore we call them weeds. Vermin, such as rats, can be linked, traced from an evolutionary point of view. Rather, the roles that they play ecologically are intimately related to these other developments. Farming and storing food, for example. And finally, immune systems, resistance to crowd diseases. These are the ecological components of this Old World Neolithic Revolution. And Crosby's going to show us, explain for us, how these things, which emerged in Southwest Asia and spread to Europe, when they migrated after 1492 to places like North and South America, they were what made the Neo-Europes, the Neo-Europeans, flourish and prosper and dominate, and essentially eliminate the humans, the native humans, not completely, but to an extraordinary degree, such that you ended up with a population that's basically all European descendants. And we'll get into, there are all kinds of other wrinkles to this. I mean, it sounds, I'm oversimplifying it for now, but we'll get into those ways in which this is not quite that simple. But that's the basic gist of this argument. And our job is to understand the details. What were these processes? How did this happen? And we're going to talk, in some detail about what Crosby calls the portmanteau biota. He says the Europeans brought with them fellow life forms, their extended family of plants, animals, and micro-life. Descendants, most of them, of organisms that humans had first domesticated or that had first adapted to living with humans in the hearthlands of Old World civilization. This portmanteau biota was crucial to their successes in the Canary, Azores, and Madeira Islands, and to their successes and failures later and elsewhere. Where it worked, where enough of its members prospered and propagated to create versions of Europe, however incomplete and distorted, Europeans themselves prospered and propagated. So we have to think about our plants, our animals, our diseases, our weeds, our vermin. We all came as a package, so to speak, across the Atlantic Ocean or across other oceans and landed in various different places. And in some places, that team prospered and established itself and was almost fit nicely. In other places, it didn't work so well. And he's suggesting in places where it worked, the Neo-Europes developed. Where it didn't work, they didn't. Does that make sense? Is that clear enough? So we might sum this up as Europeans and their biota functioned as an ecological team. Their germs annihilated populations that lacked immune resistance. When the Europeans showed up in the Americas, something on the order of 90% of the native populations died of diseases that we brought with us, that Europeans brought with them. Diseases like smallpox. Just massive, massive. It's not decimation. Decimation would be 1 in 10. This is 9 in 10 died, roughly. Their livestock and plows laid low the native vegetation. Their weeds and vermin thrived in the niches opened up as the native vegetation was altered, either by plowing or by grazing. The team worked best in climatic conditions similar to those found in Europe. So if you look at southern South America, you look at southeastern Australia, you find climates, and you look at most of the United States, you find climates that were similar in broad strokes to the climates of Europe, where these organisms, this portmanteau biota, had come from. And that would appear to be some kind of explanation, right? Or suggest itself. Now, this begins to look like a kind of Malthusian argument, or you could sort of map a Malthusian argument onto it. You could say, okay, the old world Neolithic revolution produced innovations in food production that led to population growth in Europe. I mean, someone asked, why would you walk across the Bering Land Bridge? Well, why would you get on a boat and sail across the Atlantic Ocean if you don't know if the ocean ever ends, right? Well, just as you might speculate some kind of overpopulation or some kind of push factor behind the movement of humans across the Bering Land Bridge, you might also speculate a push factor driving people out from Europe in 1492. You might say, okay, this leads to crowd diseases in Europe. We're going to talk about what a crowd disease is later, but for now let's just use the bubonic plague as an example, which results in misery and death in Europe. 14th century plagues killed roughly 1/3 of the population in Europe. So you might say, okay, this does sound like Malthus. You produce more food, you have too many people, the people end up dying in misery, and, well, misery and vice is Malthus' phrase, but in this case, misery. Dying of plague was a pretty miserable way to die. However, there's a kind of weird turning inside out, if you think of it in Malthusian terms, because in fact, yes, you got the increased food production, you got population growth in Europe, but then a whole bunch of those Europeans migrated. The population, the movement of population from Europe to other parts of the world in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries is an unprecedented demographic phenomenon. Just gargantuan numbers of Europeans go overseas, which leads to the misery and death of other people. That's not the Malthusian argument. It's not the peoples who were overpopulated who died. It was the peoples who weren't so overpopulated who died of these diseases, if you look at what happened when Europeans arrived in places like the Americas. This is accompanied by wholesale ecological transformations, which leads to huge increases in food production. So you can't really make sense of this as a Malthusian argument after all. How might we object to Crosby's argument? And here, what I'm doing today is simply providing you a kind of big overview of his whole argument. In subsequent lectures on Thursday and a week from Thursday, we'll look in more detail at the actual pieces of this argument. Right now, we're just trying to get our minds wrapped around the whole thing. Might we think of this as basically environmental determinism? What is environmental determinism? Anyone know? Yes, no? What would it mean to be an environmental determinist? Or to make an argument that is environmentally determinist? Anybody just want to offer a guess? Yeah?
Maybe the environment can change, not that people change the environment?
Okay, yes. Basically, it's an argument in which you say the reason things are the way they are is the environment. The environment causes these patterns. It's to reduce